Alright guys, this is our first video for AP Euro on Friday, March 27th. We cut the 30 Years' War kind of in half yesterday, did the first two phases. Now we're going to push forward with the next phases. And we should getting close to wrapping up period one here. If not today, we'll wrap it up probably on Monday in general. So now we're going to the third phase of the 30 Years' War, which is the Swedish phase. All right, the high watermark for the Habsburg success in the 30 Years' War came with the Edict of Restitution, 1629. The edict outlawed Calvinism in the empire and required Lutherans to turn over all property seized since 1552. 16 bishoprics, 28 cities and towns, 155 monasteries and convents. This led to King of Sweden, Gustavus Adolphus, to enter the war, triggering the third phase. Although he claimed he became involved to defend the Protestant rights in Germany, Adolphus was also interested in German territory along the Baltic. To make matters even more confusing, the French government financially supported the Swedish army because France's chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu, was concerned about the increase of Habsburg strength in Germany. Clearly, the skirmish had ignited far beyond a religious war. The Swedes rolled back the Habsburgs until 1632, when Adolphus died in battle. The next year, Wallenstein was murdered on orders of the emperor because Ferdinand began to fear that the general was negotiating with his opponents. The final phase of the war consisted of the French and Swedes fighting against the Austrian Habsburgs and their Spanish allies. This was the most destructive phase of the war. German towns were decimated, and the general agricultural collapse and famine ensued. By the end of the war in 1648, the empire had 8 million fewer inhabitants than it had in 1618. The empire's population had decreased about 8 million during this war, the HRE. The Peace of Westphalia, 1648, marked the end of the struggle. 30 years of war had brought about very little. The Holy Roman Empire maintained its numerous political divisions, and the treaty ensured that the emperor would remain an effectual force within German politics. The treaty also reaffirmed the Augsburg formula of each prince deciding the religion of his own territory, although the new formula now fully recognized Calvinism as another option as well, too. Now we're moving on to France. By the end of the reign of the powerful Francis I, it appeared as if the struggle between feudal aristocracy and the monarchy had been settled in favor of the nearly powerful centralized monarchy. However, the French wars of religion revealed that the struggle was not quite over. Although ostensibly concerned with the religious ideas, this series of civil wars was part of a long tradition dating back to the very roots of French history, in which the aristocracy and monarchy battle each other for supremacy. In part, because Calvin himself was French, Calvinism had made early inroads in France. Religious conflicts rose to the surface following the French monarch Henry II's 1559 death, when his eye was pierced with a lance in a jousting accident while celebrating the end of the wars between the Habsburgs and the French Valois monarchs. On Henry's death, his sickly 15-year-old son, Francis II, came to the throne, only to be replaced the next year by his brother, who reigned as Charles IX, and then 14 years later by a second brother, the last of the Valois kings, Henry III. All three boys would be dominated by their mother, one of the most remarkable women of the age, Catherine de' Medici. Behind the scenes of the French monarchy, a power struggle began to emerge among three prominent families. The rise of the nation-state in France had contributed to a decline in the power of the old aristocratic families. These three families had hoped that with a weak monarch on the throne, they could reverse this trend. The Guises, a family, the most powerful of the three, turned towards a militant reactionary form of Catholicism. Meanwhile, partly through religious convictions and partly out of political optimism, Admiral Coligny, the leader of the Montmorency family, and the Prince of Conde, the leading Bourbon, both converted to Calvinism. The Wars of Religion began in 1562 when the Duke of Guise was infuriated to see a group of Huguenots worshipping in a barn and had them killed. After 10 years of combat in which both the Duke of Guise and the Prince of Conde were killed, the Huguenots had the upper hand. As a sign of this Calvinist ascendancy, Henry of Navarre, a young Bourbon prince, married King Charles IX's sister. The political eclipse of the Valois family greatly concerned Catherine de' Medici, who, although was not the religious bigot of legend, constantly sought to balance out the power of the aristocratic families to protect the interests of her sons. Just a second. When the cream of the Huguenot aristocracy gathered in Paris 1572 to celebrate the wedding, Catherine encouraged her son the king to set in motion the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, in which an estimated 3,000 died in Paris. Possibly 20,000 Huguenots in total were killed in organized attacks throughout France. Admiral Coligny was killed, but Henry of Navarre's life was spared when he promised to return to Catholicism. In 1574, Henry III, the last of the Valois kings, turned to the Huguenots to defeat the powerful Catholic League that the Guise family had formed to serve their interest. He eventually made Henry Navarre his heir. And in 1589, following the assassination of Henry III, Henry became King Henry IV, thus beginning the Bourbon dynasty that would rule France up until the time of the Revolution. Above all else, the new king wanted peace in his kingdom. Henry was faced with the struggle with Spain, a nation that sought to keep France both politically weak and Catholic. Because of these pressures, and also because most Parisians remained fiercely Catholic, Henry IV, having switched numerous times for political reasons between Calvinism and Catholicism in 1593, converted permanently to Catholicism. He marked this occasion with the noteworthy words, Paris is worth a mass. In many ways, Henry's actions instigated a new way of thinking in France, the idea of politique, putting the interests of France before the goal of religious unity. Although his Calvinist allies and Anglican Queen Elizabeth were horrified by Henry's final religious conversion, he did not forget them. In 1598, he issued the Edict of Nantes, granting the Huguenots freedom of worship and assembly as well as the right to maintain fortified towns for their protection. All right, then you have a timeline here to kind of outline everything that happened. We're not going to go through all that since we read all the major issues. We're going to go very briefly look at the key concepts one more time in this first video to make sure we get all the period 1 key concepts. Let's go back and look at those real fast. I'll read ones I feel like we're not covered in the packet, and then if there's something else we cover, I'll just kind of review it. Here are the overall main concepts that are in this first period. The rediscovery of works from ancient Greece and Rome and observation of the natural world changed many Europeans' views of the world. A revival of classical texts led to new methods of scholarship and new values in both society and religion. The visual arts incorporated the new ideas of Renaissance and were used to promote personal, political, and religious goals. Europeans explored and settled overseas territories, encountering and interacting with indigenous populations. European nations were driven by commercial and religious motives to explore overseas territories and establish colonies. I would definitely go back and look over the Price Revolution and the Commercial Revolution because they don't cover those ideas in the review packets. European society and the experiences of everyday life were increasingly shaped by commercial and agricultural capitalism, notwithstanding the continued existence of medieval society and the economic structures. Economic change produced new social patterns while traditions of hierarchy and status continued. Most Europeans derived their livelihood from agriculture and oriented their lives around the seasons, the village, or the manor, although economic changes began to alter rural production and power. The struggle for sovereignty within and amongst states resulted in varying degrees of political centralization. The new concept of the sovereign state and the secular systems of law played a central role in the creation of new political institutions. So you have Italian Renaissance, which we read over that one topic. We read Northern Renaissance. Printing we covered. New monarchies, I think I read all that yesterday. Be aware of Henry VIII, Elizabeth I. New monarchies doing tax collection and developing new militaries. Across Europe, commercial and professional groups gained in power and played a greater political role in political affairs. Continued political fragmentation. The Renaissance Italy provided a background for the development of the new concept of secular state, which is where you get like Machiavelli from. Exploration, we pretty much covered all that. Creation of empires, mercantilism, so forth. Indigenous peoples being converted or killed. We talked about rivals on the world stage. All the empires establishing themselves. So after the Spanish established colonies in the Americas and Caribbean, the Atlantic nations of France, England, and Netherlands followed by establishing their own colonies and trading networks to compete with Portuguese and Spanish dominance. The competition for trade led to conflicts and rivalries among Europeans in the 17th and 18th centuries, like 30 Years' War. The next section is Columbian Exchange. We covered all that. Be aware of Columbian Exchange and goods that were exchanged and how they impacted the area. That's all good. Slave trade we covered. Slave trade. Commercial Revolution. This is something that wasn't really covered in the packets. You need to go back and review. Explain European commercial and agricultural developments and their economic effects from 1450 to 1648. Innovations in banking and finance promoted the growth of urban financial centers and a growth of money economy. Most Europeans derived their livelihood from agriculture and oriented their lives around the seasons, the village, or the manor, although economic changes began to alter rural production and power. Subsistence agriculture was the rule in most areas, with 3 crop rotation in the north and 2 crop rotation in the Mediterranean. The price revolution contributed to the accumulation of capital and the expansion of the market economy through the commercialization of agriculture, which benefited large landowners in Western Europe. Population recovered to its pre-Great Plague level in the 16th century, and continued population pressures contributed to the uneven price increases. Agricultural commodities increased more sharply than wages, reducing living standards for some. Then you have the section on still the same thing. Economic change produced new social patterns while traditions of hierarchy and status continued. The growth of commerce produced a new economic elite, which related to traditional landholding elites in different ways in Europe's various geographic regions. As Western Europe moved towards a free peasantry and commercial agriculture, serfdom was codified in the East, where nobles continued to dominate economic life on the large estates. The attempts of landlords to increase their revenues by restricting and abolishing traditional rights of peasants led to a revolt. Migrants to the cities challenged the ability of merchant elites and craft guilds to govern and strain resources. From the late 16th century on, Europeans responded to economic and environmental challenges such as the Little Ice Age by delay in marriage and childbearing. This European marriage pattern restrained population growth and ultimately improved the economic condition of families. Causation, we got all that already. And then I'm going to stop the first video there because there is some Age of Reformation stuff in this next unit, I believe. War and religion stuff. So we'll stop this video and go to the next video.